Hi guys, welcome back. This is Matt Chat number 78, featuring an interview with the designer of Darklands himself, Mr. Arnold Hendrick.
Welcome to Darklands.
Now it just so happens that a few days after I posted Matt Chat 77 on Darklands, I was able to get in touch with the designer himself, Mr. Arnold Hendrick, who graciously agreed to be interviewed by me on the show. And we're making a little history ourselves here. Apparently this is the first time he's ever been interviewed on video, and I couldn't even find a picture of him anywhere on the web. So it's truly a historic occasion. He's a very fascinating individual, as you would probably expect. He's got a deep background in history, especially military history, and he's been able to apply that knowledge to a wide variety of games and genres. Now we're going to be focused here on Darklands, and there's a lot to cover. So without further ado, here is Mr. Arnold Hendrick.
You said your background was in history. So how did you move from doing that to doing game design?
Well, it's a good question, which came first. Because as a teenager, I was playing games, and often playing war games, and my historical field is military and political history. So you could argue that history was just an extension of my gaming interest, rather than the other way around. But history has served me well in many of my game design endeavors, and the military history has certainly helped me out in a variety of military titles I've worked on, regardless of whether they were games or more recently training programs for the U.S. Army. Because by knowing military history, I understand a bit about military culture too. And history also has served me well because I now have a sort of a historical perspective on the development of the game industry. And as a game producer now, I'm able to see what I hope are historical trends in the sense, and so I can prevent our company from having disasters in the future that are similar to the disasters we suffered in the past.
I saw you'd done an article on how to hire a phenomenal game designer.
Years and years ago, yes.
So how do you do that?
that has changed a lot since then. Back then, in the mid to late 90s, game design was still something where you often could recruit out of the paper game industry. And these days, now that we have over 25 years of computer game development under our belts, there's a variety of fields and schools of computer game design, and you can actually recruit people who have training and education into the game design field. Game design itself has also advanced considerably. Back then, game systems were often overly complicated, and attention to gameplay was often woefully lacking. These days, there's a much better balance between gameplay and the human psychology of game players and the game systems underlying that are supposed to be supporting that gameplay.
Let's talk a little bit about your some of the games you did for Microprose before Darklands. I was looking at Silent Service. I remember playing that one. F-14 Stealth Fighter and M1 Tank Platoon, and there's Gunship, I believe.
Yep.
Which out of that mix of games, which one are you the most proud of?
Of all of those, I mean, they were all fascinating games to work on with great people to work with. and they were all interesting for different reasons. The Darklands game, which you recently were so kind to talk about in one of your the recent shows, I'm probably most proud of from a creative and historical standpoint. I thought we did some really interesting things with fantasy role playing in that game. From a project management standpoint, it was probably the biggest disaster I ever managed to lead, and it was that. It was the disasters we had in that game and in the process of trying to build it that got me very interested in the whole discipline of project management. It all ultimately led to my career as a game producer as well as a game designer. Because I swore never again would we do the kind of crazy things we had to do to make that game happen. Because ultimately, I dragged in most of the studio to get that game finished. We never anticipated that would happen when we started it. And it's not the thing you want to do these days when so many more millions of dollars are at stake. Darklands was Microprose's most expensive game at that time back in 1992. Took us almost 3 years to make. Depending on how you count, 2 or 3 years. It cost about $3 million. And that was a huge budget back then, but by modern standards, it's still a chicken feed. I mean, there are AAA game projects whose monthly burn rate is $3 million.
You mentioned some sort of disasters with the project management. What was it just a little too ambitious, or was there people getting laid off or fired?
No.
Behind the scenes, I mean, what are we talking about here?
Well, what you're talking about is having a very ambitious concept for a game, but not spending the time to figure out, well, how exactly are we going to do this, and how much work is it really going to mean? As a designer, I spent most of my time thinking of all the cool game design ideas and how the game could and should work. I did not spend enough time thinking about, okay, well then, if we're going to do that, how much time and effort are we going to need from the art department to do these things? How much programming are we going to need to do, et cetera, et cetera. The lead programmer on the project, Jim Sanowski, really envisioned that the game would be mostly just an action fighting game. He never sort of imagined all of the sort of large-scale role-playing elements traveling around the larger world and choosing things to do in that larger world that would then lead you into a battle situation. So he was kind of unprepared for all those extra ideas that I had about that. And I had not spent the time to sort of, do a sort of sanity check on just how much work this was all going to be. I was thinking of the game I wanted in my mind's eye, and was not spending the time to put pencil or paper to figure out what it actually meant in terms of people, time, and ultimately the dollars. That was kind of typical of us at my Microprose back then. We were thinking much more of the games we wanted rather than how difficult it was to do them, because up until that point, typically the games had only needed a half dozen to a dozen people to make, and perhaps a year of time, more or less, to make them. The whole process of game concepts, prototypes, pre-production, and then finally production did not exist yet. And that although Sid was experimenting with the game development methods on his own that sort of echoed that larger concept, as a sort of game studio, the company didn't have anything of that sort. And that was one of our great failings, and that inability to plan and budget well was ultimately the downfall of the entire firm.
You'd worked with Sid on Pirates before that, right?
Yep, absolutely.
What kind of guy was he to work for?
Sid is a wonderful guy. We actually worked as a partnership team there. Um, Sid likes to sort of tinker with software. He'll come up and try something. He started off that game by trying with naval battles, ships shooting at ships and that sort of stuff. And he has this long-standing belief that games have to tie into people's sort of popular conceptions. If a wooden ships and Iron Men era sailing ship battle all by itself, he didn't think enough people could tie into to make a popular game. But he said, now pirates, that's something everybody knows about. They've seen it on Disney theme parks, if nothing else. So he said, maybe we can make these naval battles fit into a pirates game somehow. And I was looking over his shoulder at the time, because as the first and senior most game designer at Microprose, I sort of roamed around a lot. And they enjoyed hanging out and talking with Sid. And I said, you're right, and that could be a very interesting game. But we ought to make it work so like the pirates actually worked. And let me go figure out just how things worked back then in the 17th century, and maybe we can make a more interesting game out of this. So I dug around historically, discovered the various time periods of piracy in the Caribbean, eventually urged him to focus it on the 17th century in the Caribbean, the great heyday of the pirates, rather than the early 18th. He himself had found a book or two about the conquest of Panama by Morgan in 1680 or so, and was very fascinated by that. And out of that, I started developing for him, charts of different kinds of ships and their sailing characteristics. I knew a fair bit about how sailing ships work from having read virtually all of the great sailing ship novels from Horatio Hornblower on, and how the difference between fore and aft and square rig ships and how they work, blah blah blah. So we started building all of that kind of stuff into the game in a very simple kind of way, so naval battles were more interesting. And we built various historical periods that had various cities and whatnot around the Caribbean in various states, and gave the player the ability to, change how cities were aligned during the course of the game. The most interesting part of the game was that Sid always wanted to figure out, now, how do you win this game? And he was very dubious of my suggestion that, just allow the players to do better and better and better. I said, well, give them all these different goals that they could potentially reach, allow them to see how well they do it in any one game, and maybe, try to do better the next time they play. And he was a little dubious about that, because he really was hoping for specific victory conditions. Do you know if you have won or lost? But that sort of open-ended style to victory did work for the Pirates game, and I think he embraced it much more fully in some of his later games, like Civilization.